So, Andrew Garfield got cast as Spider-Man, but then missed one too many studio parties, said a couple of unsavory things about his own movies, got fired for it, later became iconic for it, then got brought back into the fold years later for Spider-Man No Way Home.
Okay.
Only for speculation of his continued existence in the MCU to run rampant on the internet. But while we're all looking up at Disney to throw us a bone and bring him back, the distraction from why he got fired in the first place becomes bigger and bigger. See, we all love Andrew Garfield as the webhead now, but if our demands for him were always so high, then where was his third movie? I mean, surely Sony would never miss an opportunity to capitalize on such a big IP that they couldn't possibly screw it up, right? Especially when that IP is one they are holding on to tighter than MJ is holding on to this mannequin. But today we're breaking free from Disney's flashy cameo distractions and getting down to the real reason that we never got our Andrew Garfield trilogy. Basically, today we're talking about the dramatic downfall of the Amazing Spider-Man. Now, in order for us to fully understand what happened here, first we should take a look at how Andrew Garfield got cast as the web slinger in the first place. Because folks, history does repeat itself, and Sony canceling Spider-Man sequels is basically a broken record at this point. So, after the release of Sam Raimi's Spider-Man 3 in 2008, Sony was under pressure to reboot the series with Tobey Maguire's fourth film being scrapped. Why was it scrapped? Well, I think we kind of all know. And just as every modern superhero does, the planned reboot would take inspiration from Christopher Nolan's Batman trilogy, foregoing the bright colors and bombastic camp of the Sam Raimi days for dark shadows and the dreaded, grounded approach. I have grown to really hate that word, especially when it's pertaining to movies about people that wear red tights and shoot lasers out of their eyes. We're not always looking for grounded. But the idea of this new Spider-Man was to make the character more modern and more realistic in the science fiction elements of the story. Director Mark Webb was hired by the studio to helm the project, and you might know him as the director of 500 Days of Summer, a really good movie. And he also directed the recent live-action Snow White film, a probably not that good movie. If you need a clearer picture of what Sony was looking for, they almost hired Catherine Bigelow or David Fincher as directors. And this is important because the ultimate downfall of the Amazing Spider-Man film series starts here. See, Sony wanted grit and seriousness. They wanted Batman Begins meets Seven, but instead they hired for 10 Things I Hate About You meets Chronicle. What? I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying that's what happened.
How dare you!
With Webb in the director's chair, the search began for a new Spider-Man.
We found our Peter Parker very much like we did with the first movie, is we just looked at every possible young man who was in the right age category, and we tested some extraordinary actors.
Names like Josh Hutcherson, Alden Ehrenreich, and even Jamie Bell, who eventually did make it into a comic book movie all of his own, for better or worse, were considered for the titular role. Ultimately, up-and-coming British import Andrew Garfield was given the role as the angsty, shy, and radically different Peter Parker after his performance in The Social Network. The film retells the origin of Spider-Man and changes certain elements to make this version fresh. Small things like Gwen Stacy being the romantic lead instead of MJ, or Harry Osborn not being involved and being abroad for the entire first film, and just an overall difference in the portrayal of each of these characters. This was meant to be something new. It sees the Lizard as the main villain and set up something of its own cinematic universe with the characters and stories within it. Now, critically, this film was well received. The cast received a lot of praise, mostly for Garfield and Emma Stone. The aesthetic of the film and the flashy camera work and swinging sequences really won audiences over at the time. Although I will say some of the more questionable suit design choices kind of gave me the vibe that we were watching like a live action version of the MTV Spider-Man show. You guys remember that show? The writing was good, but you know, the animation, not great. But the gravy train couldn't last forever. As in the case for most Hollywood franchise films, a successful opening movie does not guarantee an easy follow-up. Instead, it led to a tortured production with dire consequences for the cast and crew involved, and under contract for more Spider-Man movies. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 goes into production, and the avalanche begins. Garfield was invited back as Peter, and so was Webb, who considered turning down the gig as the size and scope of the first film's production were overwhelming for a relatively new director.
I met with the people at Sony, and they actually brought it up to me, and I thought it was the most absurd idea. I did 500 Days of Summer. It's about, you know, a guy who's falling in love. It has what possibly could you conceive of that would make this a good idea, but they were fairly persistent.
Look at it from Mark Webb's perspective here. He started off as an indie filmmaker who made one small production with Fox Searchlights and now is taking on one of the most highly coveted IPs in Hollywood history. But Webb took a bold swing and decided to return to the helm to make the sequel. The first order of business was going to be figuring out how to take the audience's feedback from the first movie, at least the stuff that had value, and implement new elements to the second film to adjust. The very first thing to change was old Spidey himself. The Spider-Man suit in this movie is downright iconic. It's got the simple design of the original Steve Ditko Spidey, but with the giant bug eyes like something out of Ultimate Spider-Man or the McFarlane design, and even a nice, simple fabric texture as opposed to the previous film, which had more of like a leathery basketball kind of look. Additionally, Sony had some requests of their own. Chief among them is that they wanted Webb to build out setups in his movie for spin-off movies within what Sony was hoping to be some kind of Spider-Verse situation. Basically, they wanted to build up an Avengers-like team-up movie using only characters from the Spider-Man gallery, which honestly, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
I don't know.
The film also decided to brighten things up just a touch to match the new rad costume. So they upped the VFX, they upped the speed ramping and visuals, and they made the colors more vibrant to create what is arguably the most visually pleasing Spider-Man film ever. Like, look how iconic this sequence looks out of context. It's like a Spider-Man comic book splash page came to life. The story was ultimately meant to be simple. Spider-Man would accidentally have a hand in creating a monster, an Electro, and have to take him down using more than his webs, but also his humanity to bring him back down from that rage ride he's on. He would save the villain in this movie, not defeat him. But then, knock knock, it's Sony again, and guess what? They have more demands. They want more in the way of spin-offs and sequels galore. They wanted a lot of stuff to build from. So in comes subplot B with Harry Osborn, who's sick with the Goblin virus and needs Spider-Man's blood to heal himself, although it won't work. And why won't it work? Well, that is a great question, and let me introduce you to subplot C, where Peter's parents are actually like scientist spies or something, and they genetically engineer the spider to only be reactive with Peter's DNA.
Oscorp can't never replicate or continue my experiments.
I know it's a lot, guys, but that's pretty much it. Unless, you could also count subplot D, which is Peter trying to battle with the desire to be happy with Gwen or continue being Spider-Man and risk being alone forever. Man, this movie was definitely overstuffed, but you know what? I think that that's actually the next piece in this very dramatic puzzle. You get one movie that's overstuffed because Avi Arad wants to make a million movies off of the back of just the one, and then what ends up happening is the film is not well received and the sequel gets scrapped. Hashtag blame Ari Arad. I knew some of you were gonna put that in the comments anyway, so have fun. And now we have to get back to Mark Webb, because the studio demands and the way that this movie was shaping up was weighing heavy on him. See, hiring a sophomore director with absolutely no experience in directing action movies really seemed to work out for the first film. Why? Sony trusted his vision and didn't know if the film would be a hit, so they didn't give him too many demands. They just kind of let him do his thing. But after the film became one of the studio's highest grossing movies of all time, they started poking and trying to figure out how they could squeeze more money out of this now successful again IP. And now what started as a nice, simple, sexy Spider-Man story turned into an overstuffed nightmare of a production with the cast unhappy, subplots being added midway into production, and not to mention the studio pressure basically ruining the vibe on set for everybody involved in the making of it. It was all just too much for the movie. And Sony had done it again. They found a way to take a great opening installment and ruin it before it really got a chance to fly. But the movie did make some money, and money talks, so you'll never guess what happened next. Despite the troubled production, the director losing his steam, and a cast of actors that were only getting more and more famous and harder to schedule, Sony didn't care. After the release of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a third film was announced. And then, so was a fourth. And then, so was a Sinister Six movie, and a Black Cat movie.
Who wants one more?
Alright, so what happened? You know, I mean, because they had plans to turn this into a big old franchise, so something must have come along and swiftly cut it at the knees. And you know what? It all came crashing down as quickly as Sony announced it beginning. And that is all thanks to some very strange interpersonal beef between Andrew Garfield and Sony Studios. In 2014, Garfield was booked to appear at a Sony Gala event in Brazil, where he and then Sony CEO Kaz Hirai were set to announce The Amazing Spider-Man 3. Garfield had been sick that day, and he struggled to even get up out of bed, so he pulls out of the event last minute, and his absence was taken as a personal slight towards Sony, and specifically towards Kaz. And this led to a significant loss of goodwill between the actor and the studio that employed him. While this was happening, fans were starting to revert their gaze away from Garfield and more towards Marvel, who at this time was really building things up in their MCU. I mean, you have to think about, we were only like 2 years away at this point from seeing Tom Holland as Spider-Man in Civil War.
Underoos!
So couple the continued rising popularity of the MCU with the now soured relationship that Garfield has with Sony, and the result is a combustible relationship that led to the biggest burned bridge in Spider-Man history. Sony hastily canceled all of their TASM sequels, starting with Spider-Man 3 and 4, which eventually led to the cancellation of all of their spin-off films as well. And almost immediately, Sony starts collaborating with Marvel to find a way to bring Spider-Man into the now extremely impenetrably popular Avengers franchise. After Holland's own success with his first 2 solo outings as Spidey, Sony, in the interest of making tons of money of course, listened to the desires of their fans to see another adventure with Garfield as Spider-Man, and they decided to include him and the OG himself, Tobey Maguire, into the cast of Spider-Man: No Way Home. When Tobey and Andrew showed up in this movie, it very well may have been the loudest theater reaction I've ever witnessed. It was crazy, especially for Tobey. And since Sony drops the ball with pretty much everything they do with Spider-Man, I think I even saw them teasing that Andrew Garfield might have been the Spider-Man in like the Morbius and Venom universe, only for that and all remnants of Spider-Man entirely to be ripped out of those movies. They don't even say Peter Parker's name in Madam Web. That's how much Sony really gives a damn about Spider-Man. As for what the future holds, it is anyone's guess. I honestly think it is possible that we'll see Andrew Garfield come back as Spider-Man one more time. Meaning, I don't think anybody would get confused about why there's 2 Spider-Mans, because we've already seen them like in the same movie, so it just kind of makes sense. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments, or what information that may have led to Andrew Garfield's ultimate firing as Spider-Man do you have that I missed in this video? Let me know in the comments below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Thank you for clicking on our video, everybody. If you like what you saw here, please make sure you like the video and subscribe and share with your friends who like this sort of content. JoBlo was created by movie fans for movie fans, and we appreciate your support.